Next up, let's consider Mercury for the Cancer Ascendant. Now, Mercury is an interesting planet for Cancer for a couple of reasons. Number one, Mercury rules over the 3rd and the 12th house for a Cancer Ascendant. And those of you who are participating in the astrological apprenticeship course, those of you who are at the end of year 2, we've begun with the study of yogas, particularly the focus on Raj yogas, yogas for moksha, and so on, yogas for wealth, actually any kind of yoga. But what we've discovered is that there are certain planets, aside from the 5th and 9th Lord and the 1st Lord, which give rise to positive yogas, but there's also some difficult house lords, namely the 3rd, 6th, and 11th. And we've often thought about the 8th and 12th as being a difficult house. And it is, on some levels, but it's just like anything else. We need that house for various things. But when we have a house lord that is a difficult house lord, such as the 3rd Lord, also ruling over the 12th, which is one of those neutral, functionally neutral houses, well, we get a little more difficulty with that planet. So when we think about Mercury, Mercury is not necessarily one of the best planets for a Cancer Ascendant. However, it is going to have a lot of strengths. And we know that because Mercury rules over the 3rd house, and that's also where Mercury is exalted. And Mercury is a natural indicator of the 3rd house. Because if we think about the zodiac, Mercury rules over Gemini, which is the natural 3rd sign of the zodiac. So there's a lot of emphasis to speak to the strength of the numerological qualities of number 3 for Mercury and a Cancer Ascendant. So we'll talk about that. I just wanted to make sure we got that out there. But before we get into those strengths, let's consider what some of the difficulties might be. Well, Mercury ruling over the 3rd and the 12th house. The 3rd is often considered to be a house of egotism, a house of ego, a source of trying to prove ourselves. It's also considered to be the house of the mind, and that's essentially where ego arises from. When you think you are something, or when you think something should be a certain way, problems arise. The ego rears its head. So Mercury is ruling over a house of ego for a Cancer Ascendant, but it's also ruling over the 12th house, which is a house of loss, a house of debt, a house of resolution as well. So we have to remember the 12th is also a positive house for things like resolving karmas within our life. But Mercury is the principle of research, of analysis, of triviality, of seeing multiple points of view. And when we have a difficult Mercury for Cancer Ascendant, oftentimes they won't be very discerning. They won't do their research well enough. They won't take time to analyze the good and bad of things. They won't take time to weigh things out, as Mercury is prone to do. They're more likely just to go with a gut instinct, a gut intuitive instinct, which is fine. And it is wonderful to have intuitive strength, and Cancer Ascendants typically have that in spades. But just like with astrology, sometimes our intuition isn't always working. And that's why often it is better to go to an astrologer with better techniques and good intuition than simply to go to an astrologer who's very good at the intuitive psychic aspect of things. Because what happens when you visit them on a day when they're just not all there, or they're scattered, or there's something else going on, or something getting in the way with their ability to tap into their intuition, well, then you just go crank the numbers, do the math, and you get your answer. So a Cancer Ascendant has a lot of intuition, but part of what they're learning to work out in this life is to trust and tap into that intuition as it is there, but they have to start to manifest and work with the higher principles of Mercury, which is learning how to do research, learning how to compare, learning how to nitpick, learning how to take things apart and figure out, is this the best deal of all of these options based on, again, a mutual comparison. So one of the difficulties Cancer has with Mercury is they tend to underutilize Mercury. And because of that underutilization of Mercury, they tend to lack in discernment, and because of that, they tend to get themselves in trouble. And how so? But through 12th house things, which are what? Losses, debts, expenses, wasted energy, wasted time, wasted planning. And planning is important because Mercury is the planet of management and planning. And so when you have Mercury ruling the 12th and it's not doing such a good job, or it's causing problems, oftentimes their planning or executive abilities fails or falters. And we have to remember that with Mercury, that Mercury does rule over management and executive abilities as well. So this is oftentimes a strength that a Cancer ascendant has to work on. Now, when Mercury is functioning well, a Cancer ascendant can be one amazing leader, one amazing project manager. I mean, think about an effective mother who has multiple children. If they're an effective mother and they're doing really well, and again, we have to keep in mind that sometimes mothers don't have the support that they should, and so we want to make sure we're not talking about those kinds of situations. But if you are a mother and you have a good husband or partner, or whatever it is we want to say these days, they're there for you, they're stable, they provide what is necessary for you to be a good mother, and you have good support in regards to other family members and friends, and you're able to have most of your needs met, but you tend to fail in the ability to organize children's schedule or to keep it together enough to make sure that you can manage all the amazing things that you have to do as a mother to make things work well. That's usually because Mercury's executive ability is faulty, or Mercury's ability to manage multiple things, because Mercury is the multitasker. It's Mercury that's causing that problem, if we're talking about a Cancer ascendant here. And I just used the mother example because it is often related to the idea of Cancer. But Mercury is exalted in the 3rd house for a Cancer ascendant, which is wonderful, because Mercury is a difficult planet for Cancer, and yet it's exalted in the 3rd house, which can be a difficult house, which shows that when Mercury is on, when Mercury is really functioning on all 8 cylinders, a Cancer ascendant has a profound capacity to get things done, to be efficient, to be effective. The trouble is that with this Mercury, it requires a kind of cruelty, because the 3rd and the 12th have kind of a cruel connotation to them. And that's okay, because again, using the example of mother, sometimes a mother has to appear cruel to their children in order to make sure they live, that they thrive, keeping it all together. So one of the difficulties Cancer ascendants have with Mercury is the discernment and the discipline and the drive that 3rd house gives, manifesting that. So what do? Well, ideally you find people who have that and you model yourself after it. And if it feels uncomfortable, if it feels like you're being too controlling, if it feels like you're pushing too hard, you might have to get used to that for a little while, because that Mercury needs that 3rd house drive, that Virgo 3rd house drive, to act like an exalted Mercury for a Cancer ascendant. Now Mercury is debilitated in the 9th house for a Cancer ascendant, and I believe I've briefly touched upon this, but various signs have different kinds of agendas. Signs ruled by Jupiter, Mars, Sun, and Moon tend to need to be of a bit more idealistic nature, and that's a bit of an overgeneralization, but we'll just go with it for now. Whereas signs ruled over by Venus, Saturn, and Mercury tend to need to be a little more practical and pragmatic, functional. So when we think about a Cancer Ascendant having that Mercury debilitated in the 9th house, what that shows is that oftentimes for a Cancer Ascendant, an emphasis on trying to understand diverse worldviews, getting mentally engaged in all kinds of different philosophies and trying to see the value and similarities in all these philosophies, that often gets in the way of a Cancer Ascendant's ability to make good progress spiritually, religiously. And Cancer Ascendants are meant to be of the idealistic bent, in a sense, because Cancer is ruled over by the moon. And it shows that for a Cancer Ascendant, spiritually speaking, approaching religion, approaching spirituality, approaching philosophy from a very one-sided point of view, as though, for example, you get the Catholic who says, well, I'm a Catholic, and Catholic is the way to go, and that's the way to be, and I'm dedicated to it, and I do my rosary, and I do all of my sacraments, and I take communion once a week. For them, that's wonderful. And if they meet up with someone and it's a different religion, a diverse religion, sure, they should be accepting that everyone has a different path. But they shouldn't sit there and say, well, I wonder if I should explore these other ideas too, if I should consider how Eastern spirituality would benefit my understanding of philosophical things. No. The Cancer Ascendant needs to stick with a religion, with an ideal, with a principle, and just let it be. That's all there is. That's it. Cancer Ascendants benefit from that. When the Cancer Ascendant starts trying to be more research-oriented with different kinds of spirituality and philosophies and trying to see how all the puzzle pieces fit together, it usually doesn't work out so well for them. Also, the more mentally engaged a Cancer Ascendant becomes with philosophy, religion, spirituality, or what they consider to be a purpose in life, the more their happiness tends to fall apart. So a Cancer Ascendant needs to use that Mercury for discernment, for management, for being effective and efficient manager in the world. But they don't necessarily need to go start digging into all these different modes of being. It'll usually derail them. Of course, there may be other aspects of the chart that speak to that, so we cannot make that overgeneralization for anyone. But if you're a Cancer Ascendant, maybe you understand what I'm trying to express here, and you've had that experience yourself. Mercury is exalted in the 3rd, which is one of the reasons why Cancer Ascendants can be very good with their hands. They can be very good at exploring hobbies. They can be very good at collecting things. A lot of Cancer Ascendants have knickknacks, or they're good at doing hobbies that require building very fine things, such as models or putting together puzzles or painting. And why is that? Because Mercury is skill, the ability to have dexterity to do things, to touch and manipulate and put things together. Another reason why Cancer Ascendants can also be very good cooks. We usually attribute it to this whole mothering attitude, but really it has to do with Mercury's capacity to be exalted in the 3rd, because Mercury also rules over the sense of smell. That's why when we think about types of remedies for individuals, people who have good Mercuries, exalted Mercuries, tend to benefit in health-related situations from things like aromatherapy. And it's the sense of smell that also relates to taste, but allows us to understand how herbs and spices go together. So this is another reason why Cancerians can be very good at the culinary arts, because they're good with their hands and they're good with their sense of smell, and they can manage these things. And the idea of having Mercury debilitated in the 9th, Mercury rules the 3rd house, which is the house of our hobbies and our interests. So when a Cancer Ascendant simply turns their spiritual practice, their philosophy, their dedication to their culture into a hobby, into something of that nature, it tends to ruin their ability to get the most out of it. It becomes a waste for them, because Mercury also rules the 12th house, which is a house of loss and waste and wasted energy. So overall, Mercury is an interesting planet for a Cancer Ascendant. it has a lot going for it, but it is one of those planets that generally takes more work for a Cancer ascendant to manifest effectively and appropriately in its higher fashion.